You walk up to the bank, see a calm patch of shallow water right where the dock shadow ends, and drop your bait directly into the middle of it because that is exactly where the fish should be holding. Nothing happens for the next 20 minutes. You move down the bank, try another spot that looks just as promising, and the same thing happens. Again, nothing. What you probably do not realize is that the fish were there the entire time, right up until the moment your line and your splash arrived. And by then, they were already gone, pushed out to a deeper water by a disturbance you created before your bait ever touched bottom. Old bank anglers understood that bluegill and skinny water near the bank are some of the most easily spooked fish in freshwater, and the cast itself is usually what clears them out long before the hook gets anywhere near them. Water transmits vibration far more efficiently than air does, which means a bluegill holding in 2 or 3 feet of water near the bank can detect movement through its lateral line long before it ever sees anything visually. A heavy footstep on a hollow dock, a rod tip slapping the surface on the backcast, even the displacement wave pushed ahead of a sinker hitting the water. All of these arrive at the fish as pressure changes it has been wired by millions of years of evolution to treat as danger. The fish does not wait around to evaluate whether the disturbance is actually threatening. In water this shallow, with this little margin for error against predators working from above, the response is immediate and automatic. Move toward deeper, safer water. A bait and sinker landing on the water creates a splash, and that splash radiates outward as both sound and pressure through the water. Column. In water deeper than 4 or 5 feet, this disturbance dissipates quickly enough that fish nearby barely register it. In the fine, shallow water along most banks, the same water where bluegill spend a large part of their day, that splash radius can extend 10 feet or more in every direction, and it arrives at full strength because there is so little water to absorb the energy. A cast that lands what feels like a reasonable distance from where you assume the fish are holding may actually be landing directly inside the zone they can feel. Bluegill hold close to the bank in shallow water because that is where the food is. Insects falling from overhanging brush, small. Invertebrates working through silt and detritus along the shoreline. Baitfish using the shallows as cover from larger predators in open water. This is not occasional behavior. For long stretches of the day, especially in the early morning and late evening, bluegill concentrate in water you could walk through in rubber boots. The water that looks too shallow and too obvious to hold good fish is frequently exactly where the largest concentration of fish in the entire pond happens to be sitting. Here is the mistake nearly every angler makes without realizing it. You see calm, shallow water. You assume the fish are holding somewhere in the middle of it, and you cast your bait directly into that zone, right on top of where you believe the fish to be. From the angler's perspective, this looks efficient. You are putting the bait exactly where you think the action is. From the fish's perspective, a heavy object just crashed into the water directly above its head, accompanied by a wave of pressure radiating outward in every direction. The bluegill does not wait to find out what that object was. It is already moving toward deeper water before the bait has finished sinking. In the 3 seconds after a cast lands too close, an entire chain reaction happens underwater that the angler on the bank never sees. The nearest fish feel the impact and immediately move away from it, which disturbs the fish near them, which disturbs the fish near those, a ripple of displacement that can clear out the calm water you were aiming for well before your bait reaches the bottom. By the time you begin watching your line for a bite, the fish that would have eaten that bait are now holding 20 or 30 feet away, settling back into a cautious state that can take several minutes to fully relax out of. You are fishing water that used to have fish in it. You did not have a bad spot. You had bad timing relative to your own cast. The fish were exactly where you expected them to be, and your delivery method is what emptied the water before you ever got a chance to find out. Old bank anglers fixed this with 4 changes to how they melted, approached, and presented to shallow water, and none of them require different tackle. The first fix is to stop casting onto the spot and start casting past it. Land your bait several feet beyond where you believe the fish are, holding in slightly deeper or less critical water, and then slowly drag or retrieve it into the productive zone. This means the splash and the disturbance happen outside the area where the fish are concentrated, giving them time to settle before the bait ever arrives. By the time your bait enters the actual strike zone, it is moving naturally through water that was never directly disturbed, rather than crashing down in the middle of fish that just felt the impact firsthand. The second fix is respecting a minimum safe distance for any cast near shallow holding water. As a working rule, land your bait no closer than 8 to 10 feet from where you actually expect fish to be sitting. Then work it in from there. This single adjustment alone eliminates most of the spooking that comes from direct impact because the splash and pressure wave have room to dissipate before reaching the fish. Old anglers thought of this as fishing the edges of a zone rather than the center of it, approaching cautiously instead of attacking the spot directly. The third fix happens before the line ever enters the water. How you walk up to the bank matters as much as how you cast. Heavy footsteps on a hollow wooden dock send vibration directly into the water below, and that vibration travels well ahead of your arrival. Approach shallow, holding water slowly. Stay low if you can, and avoid letting your shadow fall across the water in front of you. Bluegill react to overhead shadow the same way they react to a diving bird, because for most of their evolutionary history, a shadow moving overhead has meant exactly that kind of danger. The fourth fix is adjusting the angle and force of your cast itself. A high, hard cast that drops the bait straight down creates a sharper 4C Hessel de Fond, more concentrated splash than a low sidearm cast that skips the bait gently across the surface before it settles. For close-in shallow water, work. A soft underhand lob with a low trajectory puts far less energy into the water on entry. Old anglers who fished docks and shoreline brush daily developed this motion almost without thinking about it. A gentle, controlled delivery instead of a full-power overhand cast meant for distance they did not actually need in tight water. When bluegill are spooked out of shallow water, they do not simply swim off and forget about it within seconds. Research on panfish behavior under disturbance suggests a recovery window that can run anywhere from a few minutes to 15 minutes or more, depending on how severe the disturbance was and how much fishing pressure that particular water has already seen. This is why moving away from a spot you just spooked and working a different stretch of bank for 10 or 15 minutes before. Returning often produces far better results than standing in the same place casting repeatedly into water that has already cleared out. Old bank anglers developed a working pattern built entirely around this recovery window. They fished a stretch of bank in sequence, hitting several productive-looking spots once each with a careful, distant cast, then moved on without lingering at any single spot for more than a few casts. By the time they reached the far end of their stretch, the earliest spots had often recovered enough to produce again on a second, careful pass. This rotation kept fish in a calmer state across the entire stretch, rather than concentrating disturbance in one location through repeated casting and slowly emptying it out. When the cast lands past the fish instead of on top of them, when the approach stays quiet and low, and when the delivery itself is soft rather than a hard splash, the entire character of fishing shallow bank water changes. Bites come from water that previously produced nothing, often within the first few casts of a session, instead of after the fish have had time to settle from an earlier disturbance you caused yourself. The fish were never the problem. The cast was arriving before the bait had any chance to be evaluated on its own terms. The checklist before you approach the bank. Distance. Land your cast at least 8 to 10 feet past where you expect fish to be holding, then work the bait in. Approach. Walk softly, stay low, keep your shadow off the water ahead of you. Delivery. Use a low, soft cast rather than a hard overhand drop, especially in water under 4 feet deep. Rotation. Fish a spot once or twice, move on, and circle back after 10 or 15 minutes, rather than casting repeatedly into water you have already disturbed. The fish were there before your line landed. Whether they are still there when your bait arrives depends entirely on how you got it to them. Subscribe to Traditional Angling for more field-based fishing knowledge.